Today, we're heading to southeastern Turkey, to a place that has completely upended the story we tell about human civilization. This is Göbekli Tepe, and what archaeologists found there delivered a massive shock to our historical timeline. For the longest time, the story of human progress seemed pretty simple, right? It was a straightforward story, a kind of neat logical ladder we climbed, where survival was the driving force behind everything. And that story went something like this. First, we had to learn how to farm, to get a stable food supply. That breakthrough allowed us to stop wandering around and finally settle down in one place. And only then, once we had full bellies and permanent homes, did we have the luxury of time and resources to build complex societies, to create religion, and to construct great monuments. It makes sense. But what if that neat, logical progression is completely wrong? What if the huge projects, the temples, the shared beliefs, what if they didn't come at the end of the line? What if they came first? And this brings us to a discovery on a dusty hilltop in Turkey that's been called nothing short of an archaeological bombshell. It's a place that, according to our old timeline, simply should not exist. So let's put this into perspective for a second. On the screen, you can see some of the established dates for humanity's greatest hits. Agriculture kicks off around 8500 BCE. The very first writing doesn't show up for thousands of years after that in Sumer. You've got Stonehenge being built around 3000 BCE, and the Great Pyramid of Giza rising up around 2600 BCE. I mean, these are the absolute pillars of ancient history. Now look at this number. Göbekli Tepe is dated to 9600 BCE. And no, that is not a typo. It is a full 1,000 years older than the invention of farming. It predates Stonehenge by 7,000 years and the pyramids by 6,000. The people who built this place were hunter-gatherers. So what in the world did they build? Well, the answer is carved right into the limestone bedrock of that Turkish hilltop. And honestly, it is staggering. Archaeologists have unearthed this series of huge circular enclosures, and at the center of them are these massive T-shaped pillars, some standing over 18 feet tall, weighing many, many tons. They're just covered in these incredibly sophisticated carvings of fierce creatures. We're talking lions, snakes, scorpions. This was not some simple hut. This was monumental architecture that would have required hundreds of people working together with a shared vision long before we ever thought that was possible. But here's the thing. Just as important as what they found is what was missing, at least in those first digs. There were no signs of agriculture, no pottery, no permanent houses or cooking hearths, none of the trash pits you would expect to find in a village. This is what led the original excavator, Klaus Schmitz, to famously call it a cathedral on a hill, a place of pilgrimage built by nomads who gathered for ritual but didn't actually live there. I mean, the discovery was so paradigm-shifting that it led leading archaeologists like Ian Hodder to just come out and say it. Our foundational theories about how all of this began were simply wrong. The old model was officially broken. But, the story keeps evolving, as science does. More recent work, led by Lee Clare, has started to challenge that temple-only idea. They've actually found evidence of domestic buildings, signs of extensive cereal processing, we're talking wild grains, not farmed ones, and even some really clever rainwater harvesting systems. So it wasn't just a temple. It was a settlement, a village, where ritual and daily life were completely woven together. And that doesn't make it any less revolutionary, it actually makes it even more complex. Okay, so this brings up the big question, right? If survival wasn't the main driver, what on earth could possibly motivate pre-agricultural people to organize themselves and build on this kind of incredible scale? The answer might lie in a concept we can call the ritual engine. And this is the radical idea that it was the need for shared meaning, the need for a common story, that was the actual force that first pulled humanity together in large groups and sparked complex cooperation. And the evidence for this is just everywhere at the site. The dirt they used to backfill the enclosures contains tens of thousands of animal bones, especially gazelle and aurochs, way more than a small group could ever eat. This points to absolutely massive organized feasts. They found these huge stone vats that might have been used for brewing an early kind of beer. And this just perfectly illustrates the logistics of it all. How do you convince hundreds of hunter-gatherers to spend their time and energy quarrying and moving multi-ton pillars? Well, you provide a feast. You create a shared, powerful ritual experience. The act of building itself was the point. And all of this leads us to the absolute core argument, the big timeline shock that Göbekli Tepe represents, this idea of belief before bread. So here's the crucial flip. The old story over on the left says that economics drives culture. Survival leads to farming, which lets us build a community, and then finally we get to ritual. But the new story, the one Göbekli Tepe suggests, is on the right. It says the search for meaning is what drives cooperation, which leads people to settle down. And only then, maybe to feed all the crowds that were gathering for these massive building projects, only then did we feel the need to domesticate grains and invent agriculture. Now, for a long time, you could have just dismissed all this as a strange, one-off thing, a bizarre exception to the rule. But it turns out it's not. We now know Göbekli Tepe was actually the epicenter of a much bigger cultural world, part of a project now called Taş Tepelers, which means stone hills. At least 11 other sites from the exact same period have now been found in the area, places like Karahan Tepe and Sayborç. And they all share the same T-shaped pillars and this incredibly rich, symbolic world. This wasn't a fluke. It was a revolution in human consciousness that swept across the entire region. The implications of this are, well, they're profound. It really changes how we see the very foundations of who we are as a species. So, when our ancient ancestors first decided to build something permanent, something that was way larger than themselves, their motivation wasn't practical. It wasn't about creating a better shelter or a bigger place to store grain. It was for an idea. It was to give physical form to a shared story, a common belief system. The first truly monumental acts of construction in human history were acts of faith. And this leaves us with this huge, fundamental question about our own origins. Göbekli Tepe suggests that the engine of civilization wasn't just the search for food, but the search for meaning. That it was our deep-seated need to come together around a shared story that truly set us on the path to building the complex, global world we all live in today.